We're going to be speaking to you today about rail towns to trail towns and leveraging the historical development pattern and realizing trail-oriented communities. I'm Brian Birchfield with Alta Planning and Design, and I'm joined today by Austin Dunn, also with Alta, Emily Sinkhorn with the Redwood Community Action Agency, Sophia Zander with Trail People and Zander Design, and also Mike Foget with SHN. So our presentation today is going to be broken into two parts. The first part will be looking at rail towns to trail towns, which is a high-level look at the historical development of communities around the railroad. And then we'll dig into a more specific case study of the Arcata Blue Lake, Annie and Mary Trail.
Thanks, Brian. I'd like to quickly touch on the so-called rails to trails movement. And what we're talking about here is the conversion of abandoned rail corridors to multi-use trails. And over the past 60 years, we've got tens of thousands of miles of railroad that have been decommissioned across the country. And these rail corridors are increasingly repurposed as trails for recreation and transportation. So nationally, there are over 2,000 open rail trails, totaling nearly 25,000 miles of trails. And this number continues to grow. We love rail trails because the characteristics of rail corridors also make excellent trail corridors. One aspect of rail lines that make great trails is that they transect really diverse environments, from human settlements to agricultural landscapes to rugged natural environments. And converting these intact corridors to trails creates really interesting trail experiences that feature many contexts, transcending urban and rural areas. And this map of a rail trail near my hometown really illustrates this well. Another feature of rail trails that is inherited by trails is their geometry. Trains need steady grades, even through mountain passes like the one shown here. Railroad grades are typically less than 2% with really wide sweeping curves. And what this means for rail trails is that they are relatively flat, making trails accessible to a wide range of users of different ages and abilities. One reason rail trails are so successful is that the needs of trains and trail users are really well aligned. Lastly, the feature of railroads that we're really digging into today is the way railroads interfaced with the communities through which they passed. Railroads connected communities large and small across California and across the country. And the alignment of the railroad within a town or city has serious implications for a trail that will inherit that same alignment. So as we seek to build strong connections between communities and their rail trails, it behooves us to think critically about the spatial relationship between town and trail. This spatial relationship can be broken up into this typology. In a removed trail town geography, the rail trail alignment passes outside of town, maybe a half mile or more from the downtown core. And in an adjacent geography, the rail trail passes through town, but just on the edge of its downtown area and the major amenities there. In an internal geography, the rail trail passes right through the core of the community. And each of these geographies presents a set of opportunities and challenges for developing a successful trail town. We'll look at some examples of those geographies along the abandoned North Coast Railroad. So we have in Cloverdale, this removed alignment where the alignment is outside of town. It's on the other side of Highway 101. And with this alignment, it's a challenge to engage trail users with the town and for the town to engage people on the trail. There's likely little visual connection between town and trail. And accordingly, infrastructure that safely connects trail users to Cloverdale is a high priority here. On the other end, one potential benefit of this alignment is that it features fewer road crossings. In the middle, Willits, this alignment passes through town, and it's less than a quarter mile from the historic downtown area, but it still runs kind of on the backside of the downtown. So creating a meaningful connection between the trail and the historic downtown is critical. Wayfinding and place making are great strategies to make these connections. And lastly, in Blue Lake, the alignment of the former rail corridor passes right through the center of town, and it's directly adjacent to local businesses and amenities. This is an awesome asset for biking and walking connectivity here. And the potential challenge is the higher number of road crossings that such an alignment encounters. And so special attention needs to be paid to mitigating conflicts between trail users and vehicles. We're going to dig into the particulars of Blue Lake later in this presentation. For now, I'll turn over to Brian, who will take a look at some of the structures that the railroad leaves behind that become parts of rail trails.
Thanks, Austin. So, yeah, as Austin mentioned, these next set of slides take a closer look at the infrastructure and the development that was constructed along these rail corridors within these communities. Beginning with depots, rail depots. Historically, depots were really the link between people and the railroad. Passenger arrivals, passenger departures, picking up family members, that sort of thing. The depots were really where the people accessed the railroad. And the importance of where these were located and where the depots were built is still baked into the DNA of these communities and the trail that can come after the rail on these rail trail projects. And this is really valid in both urban, like the photo you see on the left, and rural, like the photo you see on the right, settings. And along those lines, refurbished or new structures that have been developed along the rail trail corridor have been refurbished in a way that pays homage to depots of the past. So the photo you see here on the left is of a refurbished depot that now acts as a trailhead and visitor center, so that users of the trail have a stop here with various amenities that they can access. And then the image on the right is a newer construction of a city hall in Missouri that was built in architectural style to mimic the rail depot. And so since this is a city hall right on this trail corridor, it's a great example of a civic center being built on the trail. So going back to Austin's slide a couple minutes ago that he was discussing, this would be an example of your internal trail town geography. And transitioning from depots, the next prominent feature you get of rail corridors are bridges and trestles. And these structures are really cool looking, but they're what allowed trains to pass over waterways, and now they afford that same ability to trail users. So these structures possess a lot of historical value and architectural value and character, and can really enhance the trail user experience. Also of note is that many towns and communities were developed at the confluence of the river and trail. So these bridges act more or less as a gateway that can bring trail users into the community. The examples here are from the one on the left is Winters, California, and the one on the right is from a rail trail in Wisconsin. Taking a quick look at an adaptive reuse example in a more urban setting. These examples are from the Atlanta Beltline project, Atlanta Beltline Trail, and it's a former Ford factory and Sears distribution center, so a very heavy industrial site which has been reimagined as a mixed-use development. So now these structures that had a heavy industrial past are now together with the Atlanta Beltline Trail, form a very vibrant and busy marketplace. And it's a very successful example of refurbishing a rail trail. And adaptive reuse can also be done in more rural settings. It's a bit of a different scale, but still there's success stories here. The one we're looking at on screen is of a Quonset hut, which is a kind of cool prefabricated structures that were mass produced during World War II. And it was converted from a railroad storage facility to a bar and restaurant that sits directly on the High Trestle Trail in Madrid, Iowa. And then lastly, and one last example closer to home is the Simi Winery, which is a historic structure in Healdsburg that dates back, I think, 140 years. They've been making wine on this site, and the property sits directly on what will become the Great Redwood Trail. So you see the rail line here. So it's not a trail yet, but the Great Redwood Trail is coming. And so this will be an opportunity for trail users to go directly to the doorstep of this winery. And speaking of the Great Redwood Trail, Austin will now discuss some other characteristics of how the communities interact with rail along this corridor.
Thanks, Brian. So here we'll take a look at a strategy for putting some of these ideas about rail alignment and structures into practice. And what we're looking at here is a map of Willits, California from 1903. Historical maps like this Sanborn fire insurance map are a great resource for identifying and mapping out historical development patterns like we've discussed. The Sanborn maps in particular are really interesting and detailed, and they were created for towns across the country around the turn of the century, and they're available through the Library of Congress. So it's a great resource. With this map, we can start to identify some key features and spatial relationships that are related to the development of a great trail town. We see the rail corridor that will become the trail corridor. We see the historic downtown core of Willits, which is the center of economic and social life. We see a bridge structure that might offer a nice gateway into town for people on the trail. And we see buildings along the railroad, including the depot and various warehouses oriented towards the railroad. And from there, we can really dig in and start to think about how this trail might connect to downtown Willits, which is still the center of economic and social life for the town. We can take stock of the buildings that are oriented towards the rail corridor that might be repurposed to serve the trail and trail users. And we can start to envision Willits as a thriving trail town where the trail improves mobility and the quality of life for residents, and where tourists on the trail can find ways to engage with this town and its local businesses and local culture. And well, a lot has changed in Willits in the last 120 years since that map was created. So we can't plan and design a great trail by only looking at historical maps. Willits has expanded, developed, and evolved since then. But we believe that the development patterns and spatial relationships we see in those historical maps really show us the DNA or the skeleton of the town that exists today. And that structure is essential in determining how the trail will function within a community. And each trail town along the rail trail is unique, and a perspective of historical development can help us guide the development of trails. And we can leverage this information to strengthen the relationship between trails and communities. We are lucky we have the opportunity to hear from Emily, Sophie, and Mike about how the communities of Arcata and Blue Lake are embracing the development of the Annie and Mary Trail.
Well, next we're going to head up to Humboldt County on the North Coast to provide a case study of what you just learned from Brian and Austin. And we'll share about the history of the Annie and Mary Railroad and how that has influenced the development of the Annie and Mary Trail. So here we are in Humboldt County, and the Annie and Mary Trail is shown on red on the map on the right, and it's being developed to link the cities of Arcata and Blue Lake, which are located on the shores of Humboldt Bay and the Mad River, respectively. We want to acknowledge that the land around Humboldt Bay and the lower Mad River is unceded territory of the Wiyot tribe, which has been here for millennia and continues to thrive today. And Euro-American settlers often developed transportation corridors along transportation routes that Native peoples were using, often along rivers or ridges, and this holds true for our discussion today. So the Annie and Mary Trail mostly follows the alignment of the previous Arcata and Mad River Railroad, which historically ran between Arcata and Blue Lake. So it was California's first operational railroad, incorporated in 1854 with a rail on pilings 3 miles out into the deep water of Humboldt Bay. And originally a horse-drawn rail car was used to transport goods into the town of Arcata from the shipping schooners, as is shown on the photo here. This transportation infrastructure was an essential supply link between Humboldt Bay and the mines east along the Trinity River during the gold rush. The line was eventually extended past Blue Lake to serve the booming redwood industry. In the late 1800s, the Arcata and Mad River Railroad served 4 sawmills, 2 shingle mills, and also carried passengers. The rail line was informally named the Annie and Mary after 2 female switch operators at each end of the line, who are shown here in the photo on the bottom right. The railroad continued to serve redwood shippers through the 1970s and beyond, but in the 1980s, due to landslides, freight surcharges, and improved highways, a lot of these redwood shippers really switched to using diesel trucks, really dooming the Annie and Mary Railroad. In 1992, the railroad and the entire rail line between Humboldt and San Francisco Bays was transferred to the North Coast Railroad Authority, or the NCRA, a quasi-state agency. And it was also later in that year that the last train ran on the Annie and Mary tracks before much of the rail was removed for scrap. And soon after, in 1998, rail service from Arcata south to Willits was terminated after landslides closed the entire rail line through Humboldt County. So Blue Lake really had a reliance on the rail, which ran right through the downtown core, and as Austin touched on, could be termed like an internal typology of the rail connecting to the downtown. In some regards, Arcata also had a reliance on rail, and through Arcata, the rail is adjacent to Arcata's downtown. But Humboldt Bay also provided shipping connectivity as well. Blue Lake was historically a recreation destination, with it being just east of the coastal fog belt, therefore getting more sun in the summer. So people from Arcata would hop on the train and roll out to Blue Lake for a day at the river, as really depicted in this photo on the left. So Blue Lake celebrates this rail history as shown in the photo on the right, which is the same building kind of in the top of the old photo. But now the city of Blue Lake is also really investing in being a recreation destination again, with many amenities located within 2 blocks of the rail corridor. So after much of the rail was pulled up in the late 90s, Blue Lake community members united to advocate for a rail trail and formed the Friends of the Annie and Mary Rail Trail. They began organizing in the community, holding events, and later incorporating as a nonprofit organization for grassroots fundraising. Photos of many of those events are shown here. And really they have continued this dedication tirelessly for 2 decades as multiple jurisdictions and nonprofits have since collaborated to advance the Annie and Mary Trail. RCA completed the Annie and Mary Trail feasibility study with funding from the State Coastal Conservancy. And later, Humboldt County and the Humboldt County Association of Governments initiated right-of-way analyses along the rail corridor and researched potential rail banking. Then multiple jurisdictions have been leading grant seeking to develop segments of this trail to be managed in a multi-jurisdictional manner. So Friends of the Annie and Mary have really provided matching funds for preliminary studies and these grant applications. In 2017, Blue Lake was awarded active transportation program funding for phase 1 of the trail through Blue Lake, which Mike will discuss. And Arcata pursued the westernmost segment of the Annie and Mary through a planning study and an ATP grant, which Sophia will discuss next. So robust community engagement has been essential throughout the development of the Annie and Mary Trail. And here are some photos from several community engagement events for the City of Arcata's project pre-COVID. So not just holding workshops, but also implementing a temporary infrastructure demonstration along a busy walking commute corridor, showing what the trail could look and feel like and providing various input opportunities, holding pop-up information booths during lunchtime in business districts adjacent to the trail, providing translation of outreach materials and language interpretation at events, and engaging Spanish-speaking families within local schools. So authentic engagement has vastly improved the Annie and Mary Trail, and these projects use creative outreach techniques to reach historically underrepresented communities, which can often be a challenge with limited budgets. In 2018, trail development efforts on the Great Coast were greatly aided by Senator McGuire and the passage of SB 1029, which initiated an assessment of the NCRA's rail line and finances to move towards transition of the rail agency to a trail agency. This provided a great opportunity for more cost-effective rail to trail design instead of a rail with trail requirement. The Annie and Mary Trail is now the northernmost segment of the much anticipated Great Redwood Trail between Humboldt County and San Francisco Bay, and Arcata and Blue Lake are well positioned to grow further as recreation destinations. Now I'll pass it to Sophia to discuss in more detail the City of Arcata's efforts.
Thank you, Emily. As Emily mentioned, a few years ago, the City of Arcata received ATP funding for the planning and the preliminary design of the Arcata portion of the Annie and Mary Trail, shown here in red on this slide. Just as we were getting started on this project, that was when the Great Redwood Trail legislation was passed. This allowed us to focus the project on rail to trail options rather than having to analyze both rail with trail and rail to trail options. The city has been committed to the trail all along, but even with that commitment, locating the trail on the actual rail corridor wasn't always a given at this point. In the nearly 30 years since the last train ran on this corridor, the neighbors have grown used to, as they often do, neighbors have grown used to the conditions and in some places have encroached on the right-of-way. This is shown on the top left photo, one of many places where the encroachment occurred. There were also concerns about remoteness of some of the sections, potential property crimes, and user safety. These concerns were all taken very seriously, as was the community interest in examining options for routing the trail on nearby parallel roads, such as the one in the top right photo. Based on corridor analysis and the extensive public outreach, we developed 3 alignment options for deeper review. The map on this slide, which I have to point out is oriented north to the left, shows the rail corridor in red. The blue and purple lines are alternative alignment options that we developed. And then also based on this analysis and the outreach, we also identified critical trail connections and access points. These are shown in yellow on this map. All of our background work, including the outreach, analysis, and more other work, helped us develop a clear rubric for analyzing and comparing the 3 alignment options. We mapped and quantified the most important points to allow everyone to understand the costs and benefits of each option and be able to compare them equally. For example, one key point of discussion that kept coming up was about the potential alignment through this industrial area shown on the diagram on this page. There were good arguments to be made for each route through this area, but mapping and quantifying the road crossings and the mostly industrial and very busy driveway crossings made it easier to really understand the benefits that using the rail corridor would present through here. Another great thing about this project is that the city took a really expansive view of connectivity. Looking beyond the corridor, this project looked to maximize trail impact by prioritizing bike and pedestrian infrastructure improvements and connections to and from the trail. The city recognized that by improving connectivity between the trail and residential and commercial areas, they can also boost social and economic outcomes far beyond the trail footprint. This works at a wider level. There are several regional trails existing or in the works nearby that provide recreation and transportation opportunities. The map on this slide shows the Annie and Mary Trail, again in red. The portion in Arcata is the larger dashed portion. It also shows other regional trails, including the Humboldt Bay Trail, shown in pink to the south, the Hammond Trail, shown in orange to the northwest, and the Arcata Ridge Trail branching off to the east. This connectivity is even more important on the local level. The city used this project to ensure connectivity to neighborhoods that have been isolated by freeways and other development. These freeways parallel much of the rail corridor. As Emily discussed, there's ancient and historic transportation corridors that keep getting used over and over again, right? So the freeways often parallel rail corridors. And in this case, they're very close to the rail corridor in several locations. In this condition, they create a barrier to access. Several of the overcrossings over the freeway have little or no bike and pedestrian facilities. As we were finalizing recommendations for trail access points, we also ran a network analysis to both show how the trail would increase connectivity, but also ensure that we prioritized access points where they would have the most impact. We included specific recommendations for each connection, including beyond just the connection to the corridor. So this included sidewalks or new and improved bike lanes where none existed, as shown on this diagram. For reference, again, the rail corridor is shown in red. New and improved bike lanes are shown in green, and new sidewalk or pedestrian connections are shown in blue. I should also note that while the final alignment resulted in only a few roadway crossings and driveway crossings, each of these crossings was treated as another connection opportunity, in addition to including a safe crossing. Finally, we also made recommendations for additional trailside features, such as lighting and signs. Lighting was one of the most highly requested features, but of course, due to the expense of installation and maintenance, we looked at how to prioritize locations to maximize the impact for those installations, if and when they are available. As is frequently discussed at this conference, signage is one of the most cost-effective elements of a trail. Even the simplest sign provides direction and trail visibility. So to that end, we also provided recommendations for simple and different levels of more involved signage. Finally, while much of the corridor, the trail width is going to be driven by the adjacent grades, property boundaries, et cetera, where there is additional width available, we recommended including widened shoulders to act as a soft surface trail for walkers, runners, and equestrians. Next up, we're going to hear from Mike about the actual implementation of the first segment of the Annie and Mary Trail in Blue Lake.
All right, thank you, Sophia. So we give an example would be Blue Lake as the rail town to trail town. So as you gone through earlier, great examples of structures that Brian talked about being core to a town center. Blue Lake's history really is centered around rail, as evident here by the kind of different photos of what was our depot and core to town, and now is actually our museum. It's been a museum for a while, and that's where we got some of our photos from. As going back to the Sanborn maps, you can see the history again of downtown Blue Lake really was centered around entertainment. It was a trailhead for the mines, for gold miners in the late 1800s, where they'd get their supplies at the kind of this triangular structure at the Bizard store in the livery stable with the mules and pack into the Trinity Alps. And it was entertainment with dancing in a hotel in the Blue Lake, the pond. The lake is now gone, but we still have a lot of the structures. And the river is just to the west, just several blocks of town. And we actually have, when we talk about a trail town, we have world-class mountain bike trails about a mile to the south. So that'll give access, as well as we have this connectivity at the end of the Great Redwood Trail. So getting into the actual trail development, the challenges that we faced in building this first phase, again, we had structures that we had to get in limited access. We had to get this pedestrian bridge through several buildings to cross the creek in town. And we had other factors that we had to address as well. One of the key things was with our permitting and water quality with the Regional Water Quality Control Board, is we had to include low impact development features to enhance water quality, because our drainages were going right into a tributary to the Mad River. So we had to incorporate some plantings, taking drainage off the street, and even some swales, some vegetated swales as well, to improve water quality before we fed into the drainages that fed to the tributaries of the Mad River. Some of the first segments completed, again, the Annie and Mary, the Blue Lake portion, is after 20 years of hard work, and through ATP grant funding, we were able to actually implement the trail section. You can see the gold shovels for the groundbreaking. And then when the trail was freshly paved, we had to test out the asphalt and gave it its inaugural skate. It performed well. And you can see, again, the core to town across from the depot is one of the original storefronts, and that incorporates that mural. I have some kind of before and after photos. I just want to kind of highlight some of what the trail and the alignment looked like before, and how implementation of the trail, it has really enhanced our downtown community. You can see the creek and the bridge. This is where the bridge was going over the building on the left and was laid in on the footings, and the creek goes underneath. And then you can see it's getting used by some kids here in town. And we have a pocket park just beyond where they're heading. So we, again, enhance public space within the railroad corridor. We had a lot of challenges in terms of installing this. It looks pretty straightforward with a flat grade. This should be easy to implement a trail. The problem is after the rails have been removed, and over 20 years of people getting used to encroaching on the railroad right away and parking, and actually the road width, the railroad right of way is partly way into that road width. We had to, in order to install the trail, we actually had to go from two-way traffic to one-way traffic on that frontage road to still allow parking and to factor in our trail width with that. You can see the 4-foot wide gravel trail that we implemented here for the equestrian and a soft surface. And we also had drainage. It's fairly flat through town, so we had challenges with drainage. So again, we had to factor that in. You can see a valley gutter helping assist with our drainage issues. Here we can see our civic center. So this is just facing the opposite direction, heading west. And this is our city hall. Again, our civic center is right off the trail, and our recreational area is to the left. That's where our skating rink. So if you saw on the Sanborn map, we have over 130 years of skate history, in our town of Blue Lake, and our ball fields. So kind of our civic and recreation areas are literally right off the trail. This is the core of our town. We tried to incorporate features that included, we left the rail within the road prism, and we can see in our crosswalk where the roads are in there with between the concrete. And you can see it lines right up with the trail alignment. And again, the one-way, we converted two-way street to one-way street and still allow for some parking. Here we're at grade, so we still had to allow for drainage to kind of come off the road and work its way into the swale. Again, it's a really flat area. So these are some of the challenges that we had to face with our trail construction. And then here again is an alignment. This is kind of on the western edge of our trail segment prior to, and then you can see how we enhance that. You can see the gravel path for equestrians, and here's a vegetated swale to address stormwater, enhance water quality, and for a buffer between the road. And you can see some of the signage that we incorporated. Actually, it was one of the Friends of the Annie and Mary, that's their artwork, and we incorporated that into the specs and got that added to the trail signage. And as everyone talked about, the Great Redwood Trail, this 300-mile long trail connecting the San Francisco Bay Area to Humboldt County, and we're here at the end or the terminus. So you can kind of see the rail history at the lower left with the Annie and Mary train going right through town. Apparently we only had white paint available historically in town, but to the upper right, you can see the logger bar, the saloon, the Grange, the green building is now a spot, used to be a saloon historically, but you can see this is our downtown core area, and the trail terminates right, it kind of spills right into downtown. Lessons learned. So there's a lot of challenges in this. So I think it's really being patient but persistent. Emily was talking about all the fundraising efforts and Friends of the Annie Mary and RCAA working over the years, tabling at various fundraisers over the years, just really putting the little donation jar out, doing raffles. We did some races to help raise money for some events. Again, the mountain bike community is really active out here, and this linkage to mountain bike trails to Annie Mary is a great access. We have, it's really challenging in terms of these communities were connected by rail. There's really no safe connectivity between Arcata, Glendale, and Blue Lake. So this is really important for safe alternative forms of transportation between these communities. Partnerships are really important. We could not have done this without the help of Humboldt County. Hank Seaman has really been beneficial and instrumental to developing trails throughout the county. And then again, the nonprofits with RCA and Friends of the Annie Mary, and partnering with City of Arcata and Blue Lake, taking on those first phases of the trail development, starting with Blue Lake, and Arcata is soon to implement their phase. And then partnering with Caltrans and our local COG, Humboldt County COG. So our challenges that are facing us, the infill between Arcata and Blue Lake is going to be the most challenging. That's the crossing of the Mad River. So you can see here the historical trestle bridge crossing. There's another large Warren Creek trestle. That's a pretty substantial trestle that's involved. The right-of-way, the Annie Mary rails were removed over 20 years ago. The picture to the lower right, you can see that the rails are missing, and in these unincorporated areas, that kind of fronts a lot of private property, and there's the challenges of establishing the rail corridor. And the other challenges I mentioned, Humboldt County has done a lot. We're a large county in size, but small in population, so limited resources in terms of finances. So that's where we have to partner, and one of those is working with Caltrans to help with one of the trail alignments and segments. So our next steps is, again, supporting the rail banking efforts for the Great Redwood Trail initiated by NCRA. City of Arcata, as we mentioned, they just secured ATP, or their approved to get the next round of Cycle 5 ATP funding. And they're going to start in on the design and construction. And then really just revisiting how we then connect Arcata and Blue Lake segments. So there's 2 segments left. That's the pink trail that connects Glendale to Arcata, and that crosses the Mad River. That's that bridge picture you saw. And then connecting the communities of Glendale and Blue Lake. Again, no safe bike or pet access between those communities. So we're looking at probably using 299 alignment that you can see here on the green line. That'll connect the 2 communities, and that'll allow a partnership with Caltrans. The existing railroad route, which is the red dash line, that goes through a lot of industrial areas, and that could prove challenging. So we are looking at, through some preliminary studies, we looked at that Caltrans alignment. So with that, I just want to thank you for attending our session today and our presenters.